All right, we are in week 6 of our series 7, which means there's only one more week after this. Some people are like, man, I'll be glad when this is over, because each week he just keeps making me mad. He says something and it's my toes are sore. But we are in week 6, and this is taken from Revelation 2 and 3, the letters that were written to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, or what we know as modern-day Turkey. These letters were given to John in a vision from Jesus. He appeared to him while he was on this island. He had been put on this island in exile as a prison because he had preached the gospel. They had tried to kill him, tried to martyr him, but it wasn't working, so they thought, we'll just make him ineffective. We'll stick him on an island. And so Jesus appeared to him and said, write down everything you see. And there was some imagery that happens throughout the book of Revelation, but on the beginning of it, he said, there's 7 churches in Asia. I want you to write these letters to them. And so he did, and these are 2 individual churches, 7 individual churches, but they're also to the church as a whole. And Jesus knew how important his words would be for the future of the church, the bride of Christ, so much so that when he was telling John what to write, he gave this instruction in chapter 1, verse 3. It says, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. Blaine, if you could please pull me out of the monitors. I've got a significant ring up here, and I don't need to hear myself. I hear myself all the time. So there is a blessing attached to those that read it, and those that hear it, and those that keep what's written in it. So that's significant. Jesus knew how important it was, so much so that he said, if you read it, and if you listen to it, and you apply it, then you will be blessed. So Jesus dictated these letters that were to be delivered along the Roman postal route. And you can see I have a map there that just shows the way that it goes around. It started with Ephesus and then Smyrna, then all the way up to Pergamum, down to Thyatira, to Sardis, and then today we're going to open the letter to Philadelphia. That was the Roman postal route. That was the order that they were written in. And each one of those churches, the letters, Ephesus was the church that lost its first love. Smyrna was the crushed church, the church that was pressed, filled with persecution. Pergamum was the church that was compromising. Thyatira was the tolerant church. And Sardis, the one we talked about last week, was the sleeping church. And that brings us to the 6th church, Philadelphia. So we have the letter that was written to Philadelphia. But before I open the letter to Philadelphia, I want to tell you a little bit about that city. Philadelphia, we have one of those in the United States, in Pennsylvania, and we know, because it's a pretty popular city, what that name of that city is and what it means. Philadelphia means the city of brotherly love. And it was named the city of brotherly love by the founder, Attalus, who greatly loved his own brother. King Attalus named this because his brother would eventually take over for him, but it was considered a doorway into the region to spread the Greek language and culture. The Greeks had taken over, and if you look up on the map, on the left side of the map there is Greece. It's off to the side. But they had invaded and had taken over what we know as modern-day Turkey. And that was the doorway into the Middle East for them to spread their language and culture. And Philadelphia was a very key place for that. But Philadelphia was known for something else as well. In AD 17, there was an earthquake that just devastated that whole region. There was a massive earthquake, and it didn't just affect Philadelphia. It really did some damage to most of the cities in that area. But in Philadelphia, they were a bit unique in that, for some reason, right there, they experienced continual aftershocks. It wasn't just the one big earthquake. Sometimes daily, for up to a year after the earthquake would happen, they would be experiencing tremors. And so they would try to rebuild. And as soon as they would rebuild, there would be another tremor, and it would crumble again. And it was just this cycle over and over again. They would try to rebuild, and another tremor would happen. And during the rebuilding process, it would crumble. Now, the Romans came into power after the Greeks, and the Romans are in power at the time that this letter's written. And we know that the Romans were famous for their heavy taxes. They would come in and impose taxes on all the people that would kind of oppress them, that would keep them under their thumb. And because of this earthquake that happened, the people in the cities in the region, Rome wanted to help them rebuild. And so the people in Philadelphia requested Rome, said, please come help us. Help us rebuild. Help us do something. And so Rome actually answered them. They gave them this amazing gift that wasn't much, but it was significant to them. Rome exempted them from having to pay taxes. They said, okay, we get it. Man, we've seen it. Every time you try to rebuild, another tremor happens. Don't know why. Don't know what happened in Philadelphia, if it's right under a tectonic plate or if God was just kind of shaking things up a little bit, not sure. But what they did, Rome issued them an exemption from taxes, but they could not stand against the Roman government. They could not, Rome gives them tax exemption, they don't have to pay, and then they're like, well, look, we're tax exempt. Caesar is a pagan. They weren't allowed to stand against the Roman government. But Rome did not make them pay taxes, and that's going to be important in just a few minutes. And as we'll see, Philadelphia, they were the second city not to be rebuked. Of the 7, 5 of them received rebukes from Jesus. 2 of them did not. And like Smyrna, Jesus finds no fault in Philadelphia. So, here's the letter to Philadelphia. It's found in Revelation chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. He says this every week. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. No rebuke here. Jesus doesn't appear to them with fiery eyes or with bronze feet. He doesn't need to remind them that his words are as sharp as a two-edged sword. He does say 4 things about himself here, though. In verse 7, it says, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one will open. So looking at those 4 things, the first thing he says is that he's holy. It's a reminder to them, but it's something that's just an acknowledgement of his holiness. He is set apart. There's no one like him. He is perfect in all his ways. He also says he is true. He cannot lie. He is faithful to do what he said he would do. His word is just as real today as it was then, and he can never go back on his promises. And I saw this is so cool. I saw this when I was in Israel, and I don't have a picture of it because I wasn't sure I was going to talk about it. But when I was in Israel, I went to a place called Beth Shean. Beth Shean is the city where King Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle, and the Philistines put the head of Saul and Jonathan on the wall, on display. David was brokenhearted because the king was dead and his best friend Jonathan had been killed. And so in 2 Samuel, David curses the mountains of Gilboa, that no rain or dew should fall on those mountains. Now, it's really cool to see if you're there. I was standing there and looked, and those mountains are bare to this day. Because when God does something, he's true, and it stays that way. Now, you can look, and if you get high enough on some of the surrounding mountains, you can see the top of the mountain where the tree line is and down into the other side. And geographically, on the other side of that mountain is the most fertile ground in Israel. It's known as the Valley of Megiddo or Armageddon. That's the Valley of Armageddon that's over there. It is the most fertile ground in that region. But on the side of the mountain where David looked and he cursed the mountains, they're still barren today. Why? Because God is true, because he is faithful. And if he did something, nothing's going to grow there until he allows it. So he's true. The third thing he says is that he holds the key of David. Keys symbolize authority. If you have a key to something, you have access. Not only do you have access yourself, but you have the ability to grant access to others. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus said, I give you the keys to the kingdom, which means that they're his keys. He holds them, the keys to the kingdom. He is the one who grants access. And here he tells the church at Philadelphia the same thing. And of course, along with keys comes open and closed doors. As the key holder, Jesus is the one who permits access. So instead of rebuking the church at Philadelphia like he did to 5 of the other 7 churches, he's encouraging them with a reminder of his character and his authority. And just like with with Smyrna and with the churches that he rebuked, he told them what they needed to hear. Philadelphia needed encouragement. And so he says, verse 8, I know your works. I know your works. It's the same thing he told all of them. Now, some of them, he went into it deeper about it. I know your works, that you did this. You have a reputation of this, that you think this, but he just ends it right there. I know your works, period. And then he goes on. Behold, I've set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. So if Jesus is holding the door open for them, that indicates that they were being shut out of something. If he's saying, I have set before you an open door, then there's something that they're being kept out of. He said, I know that you have but little power, and that word power is also another word for power there is strength. So he said, I know you have little power, little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. They were weak. They needed him. They needed the open door because they had very little strength. They were weak. They were facing opposition. And now Philadelphia was filled with pagan worship. And the thing is, though, that they weren't receiving persecution from the pagans, from those that were worshiping Caesar. That's not where their persecution and their difficulty came from. Their persecution came from other Jews that lived in Philadelphia. Verse 9, behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. That's harsh. These people were Jews by blood and by heritage. But Jesus is calling them posers. And he's calling them a synagogue of Satan because of their rejection of him and because of how they treated believers. He's telling the church they call themselves Jews, but you're the real ones. They may wear that garment. They may identify. They may have the name tag. They may wear the Star of David, but you are my real ones. And I mentioned that the Romans had granted Philadelphia a tax exemption as long as they weren't causing any trouble. And that's, deep down, that's part of what's going on here. The Jews in Philadelphia were trying to be good Jews. They were trying to keep God's law the way that Moses had laid it out and the way that even the Pharisees and religious tradition had gotten everything in the 600 plus laws, and they were trying to be good Jews, but these Christians were putting that at risk. They weren't causing any trouble practicing their Judaism. The Jews weren't worshiping Caesar, but they weren't resisting anybody who did. And now the Christians come along, and they could mess up that deal with Rome. There's a sweet deal going on. Everybody else has to pay taxes, but not the people living in Philadelphia, as long as they don't make Rome mad. Not only did the Christians refuse to worship Caesar, but they worship the one who is called the King of Kings and the Son of God. And Caesars declared themselves to be deities, and that's why there were temples that were built to them. That's why people worship them. So now there's this group of Christian Jews that were coming up, these believers in the way. There are all these people who are worshiping one who died and came back to life, and they're calling him the King of Kings. That kind of thing would get Rome's attention. And eventually it did. So in order to protect their deal with Rome, the Jews would cast them out of the synagogue. They closed the doors on these believers. Well, why does that matter? Why would believers want to go to the synagogue? They didn't believe the same thing. They believed in Jesus. Well, keep in mind that the differences between Christians and Jews back then was not as different as it is today. You see, they believed the same things. The New Testament was being written during that time. So it wasn't like they could go read the writings of Paul. Paul was living it during that time, and a lot of this hadn't been written. So what they were doing is they would worship in the synagogue alongside of other Jews because they believed in the God of the Old Testament. They were worshiping the same God. The main difference was the Messiah. The Jews were looking for the coming of the Messiah, and the believers in Jesus were like, we know him. He came. We believe the same things, but where you stop short and you reject Christ, we have accepted him. So they were worshiping Jesus, and that put the tax exemption at risk, and so the Jews turned them out of the synagogue. That's why Jesus opened his letter by saying he's the one who opens and closes doors that no man can. And here's why. Here's what they did. This is why it was so significant. Is that the Jews would take the book that had the names of those who were Jews, and they would remove the names of the Christians from the book. They would literally blot them out or erase their names from the book. And how did Rome know who had and who did not have to pay taxes? You did not have to pay taxes if your name was in the book. So that way, if Rome got wind of these Jews that were claiming that one of their own had been crucified by Roman officials but had come back to life and he was the Son of God, then these Jews could say, look, they're not with us. Check our rolls. They're not part of us. Don't shut us down. And so the Christians lived in fear, and they had no strength. They were weak. They had no authority. They had no effectiveness. But in spite of their ineffectiveness, they stood firm. Verse 10, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. He told them in Philadelphia then, and he's telling his church today, when you are weak, stand firm. When you are weak, hold on, stand firm. He's the one with the keys. He's the one with the authority. You may have been locked out of the synagogue, but I'm opening a door to you that nobody can ever close. Like Philadelphia, there may be some earthquakes that have come in your life and have really shaken you up. There's some things that you're experiencing right now, and maybe you didn't even consider it an earthquake, but as I begin to talk about it, you take that and it applies right too. Man, I was standing on solid ground, and now all of a sudden everything is shaken. My world is crumbling around me, and every time you try to rebuild, another aftershock comes. You finally reach a point of stability after you've cleaned up after what all has happened. And a tremor comes and it knocks everything down again. And then when you think that everything is stable and you think that, all the aftershocks are done, all the tremors are done, you go and you have been locked out of the synagogue where you felt a sense of acceptance, where you felt a sense of community. You feel like you're now locked out. These believers had done nothing to cause this trouble. There was no sin. There was no compromise. There was no apathy. They weren't asleep to the things of God. They didn't cause the earthquake. They couldn't control what others said about them. It wasn't happening to them because they lacked faith. They stayed faithful. All this that was happening to them, you could say, it's not their fault. But again, in verse 10, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you. They were faithful. And in return, Jesus was faithful. He's like, look, I've seen it. I know your works. And sometimes when you hear that, it's scary. Sometimes when Jesus says, I know what you've been doing, he looks at them and he doesn't elaborate because there wasn't any of that. He says, look, you have been going through it and I've seen it. I know. They were weak, but they leaned into it. They weren't trying to be strong on their own. I told you earlier that strength is an overrated attribute in our culture. We put so much on it that we live in a world that says you can't show weakness. Big girls don't cry. Men don't. There's no crying in baseball. If you've been watching any of the baseball playoffs, you might have seen a little more crying than you're used to. But when we lean into our weakness, when we lean into it and we allow God to be our strength, he will keep us during the earthquakes that we face. That when we go to try and we pull on the door and we can no longer access that which we found comfort and we find weak, we're not strong enough to open that door anymore, but we lean into him. He is our strength. See, here's the thing. Those who are afraid of weakness see trials as obstacles. There's just all these obstacles that are in my way. God keeps just giving me all these trials, trial after trial after trial, and I just can't reach my destination because of these trials. But those who lean into their weakness see trials as opportunities. Another trial is in my way? All right. Show me what you want me to see, God. Strengthen my faith because I'm going through this. I'm not always happy about it, but I see it as an opportunity. Whenever I'm in the middle of an earthquake, I get encouraged because that means God's up to something pretty big. God is doing something behind the scenes if the devil is trying to distract me, if he's trying to tear me down. Remember last week I said Sardis, they had no worries. There was no persecution. They had grown comfortable. And because they were so comfortable, they had developed apathy and they had fallen asleep. I also told you that the enemy's not going to waste his time on people he doesn't consider a threat. But if you're like Philadelphia and you're constantly facing locked doors and earth-shaking events in your life, then be encouraged because God is up to something. He goes on and says, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. Jesus didn't say he would prevent the trial from coming. He said he would keep those who remain faithful. He will keep them from what's going to happen because of it. Verse 11, I'm coming soon. Hold fast to what you have so that no one may seize your crown. To the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar. That's an important word. Say pillar. All right. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. So, earthquakes, aftershocks, tremors, all of this took place. All of this was difficult, and it devastated the area. Here's what people would do. Some would move out of town. Some would leave. In fact, I think I have a picture of ancient Philadelphia. Do I have it on there? I don't remember if I put that one on there or not. Yeah, there we go. That is what is the result of these earthquakes and tremors that happen. It's not that there was a whole lot of buildings that were torn down by being conquered. It was just these constant aftershocks and tremors. Here's what they do. Some people would just, whenever they would come, they would move out of town. Because if they're living in town and people are trying to rebuild, another tremor happens, debris falls, and it crushes people. And so they're like, I'm not even dealing with it. They wake up one morning, and I mean, you may have watched, I love watching nature shows. It's amazing how animals know things before they actually happen. How you can see animals running away from something, and then all of a sudden there's an earthquake or something that happens, and you're like, oh, well, they knew it was coming. So the people in Philadelphia, they're like, uh-oh, the lions and tigers and bears are headed out of town. I'm following them. But whenever that would happen, they would just flee. Others, every time a tremor would come, they would run to the pillars because the pillars were strong. And Jesus said, he said, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. The pillars of Philadelphia were so strong that when the earthquakes came, they didn't move. And that's what those are. Jesus told the church, I will make you a pillar. Yes, you're weak, but if you remain faithful, I will make you so strong that no matter what comes, you will remain. Everything else will crumble, yet you will remain. And this is what it looks like. Those are the pillars of ancient Philadelphia. Over 2,000 years ago, those pillars were put in place. Everything else around them has crumbled, but not the pillars. And so when they lived in that city and they knew what was going on, Jesus used imagery, and he used beautiful imagery when he said it. And he said, I will make you a pillar in my temple. And every day they would walk by and they would see those. They would see what those pillars used to hold up, but weren't there anymore. But they would see and they would know that no matter what, if Jesus is going to make me like that, then that is something that I want to be a part of, something that is everlasting, something that no matter what happens, they would see those and know that the ground may shake, but if God told me that, I have confidence that that's what's going to happen. That if when I am weak, that it's God's strength that will make me a pillar like that if you remain faithful. And that's the thing. If you remain faithful, he will make you the pillar. That means that when others are in turmoil, some of them will hit the road, but some of them will look to you and will see how you have existed during the earthquakes and trials of your life, and how God has strengthened you, and that Jesus has made you a pillar in the temple. And what happens when other people come to you? You don't take the credit. You show them who the true foundation is. That the only reason that you are considered a pillar is because you were faithful and because God is faithful to do what he said he would do. And you show them Jesus. Maybe you're not ready to stand strong in the middle of your weakness. The earthquake sounds like about the worst thing that could happen right now. Or maybe you've just been trying to open door after door in your life, and you find each door that you go to is locked. Every time you try, you just can't move past a certain level. You just can't achieve whatever it is. You know there's more, but every door is locked. When I was in high school, there was a janitor that had all these keys. And you could tell where the janitor was because you could hear those keys from around the corner. And if you needed to get into any room in the school, the janitor had the keys and had the access. I'm going to tell you this morning, it's time to get a hold of the one who has the key. It's time to get a hold of the one who has access. Whether you know it or not, God is doing something here at Rich Community Church. And there are many of you that were part of what he's doing this morning. You participated. You're mobilized as the army of the Lord. It may not seem like it when you come to church and the pastor's been preaching messages that offend people. But hold on, because here's what's coming. Verse 12. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Back when I was involved in city government, that opened a lot of doors for me. I was a mayor of a small town, but because of that, I got to travel and represent my city in different places. I got to travel to Tallahassee and represent my city in front of the state capitol. I got to travel to Washington, D.C. and represent my city in front of the nation's capital. And there were some really cool things that took place. I found myself and my family at certain times, we would be in places that the general public didn't get to go. On a few occasions, we were able to, the way it's set up in Washington, D.C. is you have the Capitol building. One side is the House of Representatives, one side is the Senate, and then across the street from that building are their office buildings. Well, in order for them to go back and forth from their office buildings, without having to go across the street where there's all these people that are trying to, reporters and other people that are looking to do them harm, there is a subway, a private subway, that goes back and forth between the office buildings. And we have been blessed because of the open doors that I've ridden on the Congress train, the House and the Senate side. And the general public doesn't get to do that. And it's weird because I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these legislators and all these people that I've seen on different news channels. And here they are, these lawmakers, and I'm riding in this little open subway. And when I say subway, it's not like the subway where no, it's like a little open, like a little trolley car. And it was really cool that we got to experience that. One time in particular, we were meeting with a senator. And the senator said, hey, I have to go vote. You guys want to go with me? Yeah? So we got on the Senate train, rode the Senate train across. We walked all the way up to the door of the Senate, and he said, stay right here. You can't go in here. But he walked in, he cast his vote, he came back out. Of course, I'm eating it up. I love all this, having access to different places, and I'm grinning ear to ear. And we went to walk, and there's a private elevator for senators only. And when we went to get on that elevator, there was a reporter that had access back there, and he tried to get on the elevator with us. And the person who was with us stopped him and was like, nope, senators only. And here I am with my wife and my daughter, and that reporter looks at us and like, but... And the senator just kind of gently smiled. He looked at me, he looked at that reporter, and he said, he's with me. They're with me. They have access because they're operating under the authority of my office. And nobody's going to tell that senator that he can't have somebody in that elevator with him. Nobody's going to tell that senator that he can't have somebody on that train with him. They're with me. Will you stand? That's what God's doing. God is opening doors to those who remain faithful. And more than that, He's putting on you His name. I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from God out of heaven, and my own new name. You see, we get access to places that other people don't get access when we're faithful, when we're with Him. And His name opens every door. In the same way that the Jews erased the believer's name from the book, today the enemy will try to do everything he can to discredit you and distract you and have your name removed from the book of life. But when your name is written by God, He cannot take it out. The enemy cannot take your name out of the book. Try as he might, the enemy cannot remove your name from the book. The Father looks and says, no, she's with me. He's with me. They have my name. And the only way they get rid of it is if they remove my name. Verse 13, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He put his name on you if you believe and you stay faithful, and he'll open doors for you. But if you haven't, if you're in that place where you're on the outside, every door is locked, your ground is shaky, you're weak, and you don't even have the strength to open a door that isn't locked. Lean into that weakness and let him be your strength. Because he said, I'll make you a pillar in the house of my God. When people walk by and they see ruins and they see life crumbled and they see disaster everywhere, and yet they see something standing strong, and he'll get the glory for it. As I begin to pray, if you have need, you can come down. We'll pray. I know we prayed already. We'll pray again. There's all about it. But it's time to let your weakness become strength in him.